In the dead of night, the first explosions tore across the runway of Iran's Tabriz airbase. For a brief moment, the airfield lights flickered as ground crews scrambled between parked aircraft. Then a fireball erupted beside a waiting fighter jet, sending burning debris across the tarmac. Within seconds, the aircraft, an aging F-4 Phantom II, was completely engulfed in flames before its pilot had even reached the cockpit. That was only the beginning. Across Iran, similar scenes were unfolding at almost exactly the same moment. One after another, airbases that had taken decades to build were suddenly erupting in fire. Hangars collapsed under precision strikes. Radar towers shattered into twisted metal. Fuel depots exploded with enough force to shake the ground for miles in every direction. Within the first hour of the attack, Iran's Air Force, assembled slowly over nearly half a century, was already beginning to disappear. But the destruction visible on those runways was only the final stage of an operation that had been set in motion long before the first bomb ever struck. Hours before the opening explosions, deep inside American and Israeli command centers, intelligence feeds were already streaming in. Satellite imagery tracked aircraft parked inside hardened shelters. Signals intelligence intercepted Iranian radar emissions. High-altitude surveillance drones quietly mapped every air defense corridor protecting the country's major airbases. Among them were aircraft like the RQ-4 Global Hawk and the armed reconnaissance platform MQ-9 Reaper, both feeding real-time data directly into strike planning networks. Every radar rotation was analyzed. Every missile battery location was marked. Every runway was measured down to the meter. Iran believed its air defense network could detect incoming attacks long before enemy aircraft crossed its borders. But by the time Iranian radar operators began scanning their screens that night, the war had already started without them knowing it. Instead of incoming aircraft tracks, their displays filled with static. Electronic warfare operations had already begun. Across multiple frequencies, powerful jamming systems flooded Iranian radar bands with noise. Communication relays between command centers began failing. Data links dropped out. Radar sites struggled to maintain any coherent picture of the skies above them. Within minutes, the integrated air defense network that Iran had spent decades assembling was effectively blind. This was the non-kinetic phase of the campaign, an invisible assault designed to confuse, isolate, and paralyze Iranian defenses before a single missile was launched. And it worked almost perfectly. Only after that digital disruption did the first strike aircraft begin moving toward their targets. Flying low across the region were stealth fighters like the F-35 Lightning II. Their radar-evading profiles allowed them to slip through the gaps in Iran's already crippled detection network. Behind them, strike aircraft including the F-15E Strike Eagle and the F-A-18 Super Hornet prepared to launch the main wave of attacks. Their first targets were not the aircraft themselves, they were the systems protecting them. Surface-to-air missile batteries began exploding across Iran's defensive perimeter. Radar vehicles erupted into fireballs as precision munitions slammed into their positions. Command bunkers responsible for coordinating missile launches were hit within minutes of the attack beginning. Without radar coverage or functioning command links, Iranian air defense crews were left scrambling to launch missiles blindly into the sky. Few even had the chance. With the defensive shield collapsing, the second wave of the operation began. Runways were struck with precision bombs specifically designed to crater landing strips and trap aircraft on the ground. Hardened aircraft shelters were hit moments later. At Tabriz, a parked F-5 Tiger II erupted in flames beside the wreckage of another Phantom that had been preparing for takeoff only minutes before. Further south, at installations scattered across the country, Soviet-era strike aircraft like the Su-22 and interceptors including the MiG-29 were destroyed before their engines ever started. Iranian pilots who had trained for years to defend their country never even reached the sky. Within the first 24 hours, entire squadrons of aircraft were reduced to burning wreckage scattered across airfields. And the escalation was far from over. With Iran's air defenses collapsing, heavier American bombers entered the fight. Earlier in the conflict, stealth bombers like the B-2 Spirit had been used to strike hardened targets and underground facilities. But as confidence grew that Iran's long-range missile defenses were failing, another aircraft began appearing in the skies above the region: the B-1B Lancer. Unlike the stealth-focused B-2, the B-1 could carry massive payloads of conventional bombs designed to devastate large military complexes. With Iranian radar coverage gone, these bombers could operate with increasing freedom over parts of the country that had once been considered well protected. When their munitions struck, the results were catastrophic. Fuel depots erupted in towering fireballs. Ammunition bunkers detonated in secondary explosions that rippled across entire bases. Shockwaves rolled across the ground as storage facilities ignited one after another, creating chain reactions that engulfed whole installations. At several locations, the destruction spread far beyond aircraft parking areas into the infrastructure needed to keep the Air Force operational at all. Maintenance hangars burned for hours. Logistics warehouses collapsed into rubble. Radar towers lay twisted and shattered across the landscape. Even if Iran had surviving aircraft, many of its air bases were no longer capable of launching them. The result was something military planners rarely achieve so quickly in any conflict: near total air superiority. For Iran's pilots, the consequences were immediate and brutal. Facing advanced American aircraft like the F-16 Fighting Falcon, the Strike Eagle, and the stealth capabilities of the F-35, attempting to launch from exposed runways would have been little more than a suicide mission. Many never even tried. In the days following the opening strikes, reports suggested that nearly half of Iran's roughly 400 combat aircraft had been destroyed or rendered completely unusable. Those that remained were largely older platforms, airframes built decades earlier and kept operational only through increasingly difficult maintenance efforts under years of international sanctions. Aircraft like the F-14 Tomcat, once among the most advanced fighters in the world, were now relics struggling to remain airworthy without access to modern parts or upgrades. Even before the bombing campaign began, analysts had estimated that only about half of Iran's aircraft were fully flyable on any given day. Many others had already been grounded permanently, stripped for spare parts just to keep the rest of the fleet in the air. Now, even those remaining aircraft faced a new problem. Their air bases were gone, runways were cratered, the radar network was shattered, fuel storage was destroyed, command centers were offline. Without those systems, launching even a single fighter jet had become nearly impossible. But Iran still had one weapon left: drones. As the destruction of its manned air force became undeniable, Iran began shifting toward unmanned attacks. Waves of drones targeted military installations across the region, striking bases in Gulf countries and attempting to stretch defensive systems thin across multiple fronts simultaneously. Yet even this strategy faced enormous challenges. Interceptors and air defense missiles could destroy many of these drones before they reached their targets, and the production facilities used to build them were themselves becoming targets for follow-on strikes. Meanwhile, American forces possessed drones of their own, capable of reconnaissance, interception, and precision attack. The imbalance in technology and air power was becoming impossible to ignore. Iran had spent nearly half a century building its air force. Aircraft had been purchased, repaired, modified, and kept flying under increasingly difficult conditions. Pilots had trained for years, bases had been expanded and fortified. Generations of engineers and technicians had dedicated their careers to keeping aging jets in the sky against all odds. There is something almost impossible not to feel when you consider that, the sheer weight of human effort that went into building something, only to watch it disappear in a single night. And yet, in one coordinated campaign combining cyber warfare, electronic warfare, stealth aircraft, precision bombing, and strategic bomber attacks, much of that force simply vanished. Runways burned, hangars collapsed, radar screens went dark one by one. By the time the smoke cleared across the country's shattered airbases, The skies above Iran were no longer contested. For the first time in decades, Iran's air force was effectively gone. Not weakened, not degraded, but gone. What that means for the region going forward, and whether air power alone can ever truly decide the outcome of a conflict this complex, is something worth sitting with for a while.